Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
I'm James Ward.
and this is the Hello World chapter of First Steps in Flex, which is the book we wrote. And so, just to get started, we happen to be on kind of an old Windows XP machine here, but I guess we could develop on any machine, right?
Yeah, we can. Flex
It's
applications. You can build them on Windows, Linux, Mac,
okay,
whatever.
so it's completely cross-platform. Okay, so the next question is, how are we going to develop this? I mean, do we just use our own editor and command line compiler,
We
or?
certainly could go that route. We could use any editor we want in the command line build tools in the open source Flex SDK.
But that's probably not the easiest way to do it, right?
It's probably not the easiest way to get started.
Okay.
So you could certainly go that route, but I think what we're going to do today is just use Flex Builder. And there is a 60-day trial of Flex Builder, so anyone listening to the screencast can download that and get started. And
Okay, so they can just Google for Flex Builder 60-day trial
yep,
or something.
exactly.
Okay. All right, and we've already got it installed here. Now, the other thing, I guess, the question that comes up is, we tried to write a small book.
We did.
In fact, we put a lot of effort into writing a small book and
It's hard to
figuring
write
out.
a small
It
book.
is hard to write a small book, as I know. So we wanted to write a small book because we thought it would be less intimidating. And so as a result, all of the examples are really small. And we made the decision not to have them downloadable because it's valuable.
Yeah, that's right. We really want to encourage people to type these in themselves because
Mhm.
that's really the best way to learn is you can watch the screencast, you can read the book, but until you actually get your hands into the code, you're not really going to learn.
And the examples are small enough that that's not very painful.
Exactly.
And especially when you're using Flex Builder, you get a sense of the kind of help that it gives you.
Yeah.
So, shall we fire up Flex Builder,
Yeah,
see what
let's
it
do
looks
that.
like, and start a
Let's go ahead and
example?
start up Flex Builder. So we're using Flex Builder 3, and so this was just downloaded from the Adobe website.
Okay.
And this is installed as Flex Builder Standalone, which is Flex Builder is built on Eclipse, but Flex Builder Standalone installs Eclipse and the Flex Builder plugin. You can also download Flex Builder as an Eclipse plugin and install that into an existing Eclipse. You can certainly feel free to do that on your own.
But that's harder, isn't it?
It's a little more difficult,
Okay.
and it does give you the ability to do Java coding and Flex coding together, whereas Standalone is just essentially the Flex.
So that would be the
environment.
reason to do it.
Yep.
Okay, is if you're already developing in Java or
Exactly.
some other language. Okay, but if you just want to get started quickly, the standalone version is the easiest one.
That's right.
So let's try. Let's start with just a really basic example where we display a label.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
So we're just going to create a new Flex project. So we just go File, New, and then select Flex Project. And let's call this one Hello World.
Okay.
And we can just leave defaults how they are. Don't need to get into settings at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be building a web application that runs in the browser, so that's why we specify web application. If we were building an air application, which we'll do in a future chapter, we'll select desktop application. But for now, we can just leave that all how it is and hit finish.
And it's created a directory structure for us.
It has, yeah. It's created a project, created the source folder with a beginning of a Flex application here, created the HTML template that allows us to run this in the browser, and then the bug folder, which will have the compiled application in it.
Oh man, this looks like XML. I'm not sure how I feel about XML.
Well, that's okay because you don't have to write it. You can go
Okay.
into Design View. Design.
Oh really?
Yeah. So I mean, we can go drag and drop
Oh,
things.
I see.
If we want to take a label, we can just drag a label
Oh, okay.
up here on the
That's
screen.
not
We
so
can
bad.
position it. We get nice little hints on where to position it. We can come in and set properties. We could say hello world.
Okay.
And so what we've done is just written some code.
Oh, I see. Well, I guess it's not too much XML, so
Yeah,
maybe it's
too
not so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea of using XML here is that this stuff would actually be what kind of code is this underneath the XML?
Yeah, so this is called MXML. It's just a declarative language that is one potential way to write applications with Flex. Underlying MXML is ActionScript. and we'll talk more about that later. But you can think of MXML as just being purely declarative.
Mm-hmm.
So all that we're doing in MXML is creating objects and setting properties on them.
So as a result, this is going to be more succinct than if I had written the action script.
Yes, much more succinct.
Okay, so, and if I wanted, okay, so I've got a label in there, and I assume the X and Y are the positioning.
Yep.
There's the text.
Yeah, and we can simplify this a bit. So right now, it's defaulted us into the absolute layout, which we use X and Y positioning to position things around the screen. If we remove that, then it's going to actually change to the vertical layout, which is what we used in the book, where now we don't use X and Y positioning. What's really happening is that it's going to just use the vertical layout and position components one on top of another. So very similar in the organization to what we would see here in code.
Well, that's nice because it has less code in it.
Exactly.
All right. Actually, I think we left the absolute.
We did leave the layout absolute in.
Was that a mistake?
In the book. No, I mean we can do it either way. We can use the absolute layout.
Okay, now what just happened there? It automatically filled in your...
Yeah, it just code completed, and that's something that is hard to illustrate in text in a book. But when we start typing something like layout, it actually will code hint us layout, and if we hit enter, then it code completes that. And now for layout, it knows that there's 3 possible options: absolute, horizontal, and vertical. Vertical being the default, and we can select those. And so absolute is what we used in the book. If for some reason, this is a nice little trick, if for some reason that you've lost that code hinting window, you can hit Control Space, and that will either bring it back up if there's multiple options, or automatically complete it for you. So Control Space is a very useful key combination to get back into that code completion window.
This is the one of the compelling reasons to use Flex Builder, is because it
code
keeps track of all that stuff. You don't have to be looking things up all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could write this MXML by hand and run it through the free command line compiler.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, and is the command line compiler, is that what part of it is open source?
So the compiler, the core components in Flex, so everything from data grid to combo box, all those things are in the open source Flex SDK.
Okay, so that way you wouldn't have to worry about getting orphaned for some reason. You'd still be able to have those. Okay. So now, is the application finished?
Yeah, at this point it's a fully functional application. We haven't actually compiled the application yet. So in Flex, this is not interpreted like typical web applications. They have to be compiled down into a Swift file, and that Swift file is actually the application that we run inside the browser in Flash Player. And so Flex Builder is automatically generating for us the Swift file that is the application, and the wrapper HTML and JavaScript files that allow that to run inside Flash Player in the browser.
So I don't have to create any of those myself for most applications.
Exactly. So if we want to compile this application in Flex Builder, all we have to do is save this file. I can just hit Control S, and that saves it. So that now just compiled this application, and now it's ready to run.
Oh, now and if there was a problem,
if there's a problem, yeah, let's go create a problem. Let's go, put in some thing that is obviously not a valid XML syntax or valid property, and so now we get an indicator here that there's a problem saying attribute name ASDF must be followed by the equals character. We also see our list of problems and warnings.
All right, so what does it look like when we run it?
Yeah, so let's resolve this error back to how it was, and now we can actually run this application. So there's a few different ways to do that. You can right click and say run application, or you can just click the run menu up here, and so let's just run it. So what that's now done is it's just loaded this application inside of our browser. So it's taken the HTML file that was created, that embeds the Swift file, which is our application, loads that in the browser. The browser, via the object embed tag, starts up the Flash Player, downloads the Swift file to the client, and then runs that Swift file.
But this is, we've got helloworld.html, so this is just an HTML page, and it's got the Swift file basically embedded in it.
Yep.
And I see the tag is kind of small. Can we make that bigger in the application?
Yeah, definitely. So if we want to change font sizes, then, there's properties for doing that. We can just say font size equals 24. and then we save, and that recompiles, and then we just have to go reload our browser,
Oh.
and now we're looking at that text
much
bigger.
Nicer. And it's in the upper left corner because
it's using the absolute positioning, and because that it's what is specified here. When we use absolute positioning, what it's doing is actually defaulting to x equals 0 and y equals 0 on the label. So if we wanted to move this thing around, we could say x equals 50, so that should move it to the right 50 pixels. So let's go reload that. So now we see that hello world. There we go, 50 pixels to the right.
Now, could you just center it in the page? Is that
possible? So when we're using absolute layout, there's a property that you can use called horizontal center, and we're going to tell it to be 0 pixels from the horizontal center. So now when we load this one, now it's centered horizontally, and also when the browser resizes, it's going to stay positioned horizontally centered.
Nice.
There's also vertical center, or you can also align things to the left, top, bottom, or right edges using the same sort of syntax. So that's called constraint-based layout, where you're constraining these things to specific places.
Okay, now if I don't know what some of these things are, how do I mean, what's the help system?
Yeah, great. So there is an AS doc that is really the best place to find how to use these components. So to do that, the easiest way to do that is to click on the component that you want to go to the help for, and then hit Shift F2. And what that's going to do is actually load the Flex Builder AS doc, or the Flex help, and take us right into label. And now we can actually go see the properties, methods, events, styles, effects, constants, and examples for this particular object. So we can go down and we can see the whole inheritance hierarchy that label extends from UI component all the way down to object. We can go see the interfaces that this thing implements. We can go see some information about specific styles, all the properties for this thing. We can go down and see some examples at the very bottom for how to use a label. So the AS doc is really a great resource for learning how to use these components. Another great resource that I want to point out is Tour Day Flex. If you go to flex.org/tour, there's an application there called Tour Day Flex, which has a lot of examples for how to use the components that are out of the box, as well as components that people in the community have created. So
it has lots of like, if I wanted to see how to do something, it might have an example that's similar to...
Yeah, so you can either install Tour Day Flex as a desktop application. It's actually an Adobe Air application built with Flex. Or we can just view it in the web browser. So when we view it in the web browser, what we can see is we'll get our list of components here. And let's go take a look at these. We should see, there they are. So now we can go in and drill in and see, all right, the Flex core components, there's UI controls. Let's go look at, buttons. Let's say we want to see an example for how to do a button. Well, so it's going to show us an example up here of what the finished application looks like. So here's our finished application, and then it's also going to load in the source code for this particular example, and that will appear in the...
But if I had downloaded it, if I had done the download, it would come up right away.
Yeah, because they would be stored in there. Yeah, so these are loading over the network, and there we go. They're finally loaded. So this is the source code for this application.
I see.
So there's tons of different components in here. There's ones for how do you connect to different backend services. There's ones for cloud APIs. How do you talk to Amazon or Twitter or whatever. There's there's data visualization ones if you want to see IBM's iLog controls or the Access open source project. There's mapping APIs, and then there's a bunch of community components as well. So if you want to go see Doug McCune's physics form, which is a pretty nice component here, we can go pull up this example and see the code that it takes to create this example. So Doug's physics form here, what it allows us to do is give a nice little effect when you enter the wrong username and password.
That's funny. So if I'm like starting an application, I don't really know where to begin. I could go in here and poke around and see if there was an example that was like what I wanted to do and start with that.
For sure.
I suppose there are other sites that have examples, and I could Google around and see if I could find what's going on with them. Okay. So, well, now there's one other thing that we did on our example, which is we have in the application tag, we have a name. I think in this one we said name equals hello world. And what's up with that?
Yeah, let's go see what that does.
I think it was one word in our case.
So I think that that's just going to set the name of the application. And in this case, there's no visual impact to that property.
Mm-hmm.
If we really wanted to go see what that property really did, we could go into the AS doc for application and look up that name property and see what name really does. So let's go into the properties and let's go find name down here. So name, here's name, indicates the instance name of the display object. So in this case, it's not really being used for
So it's
anything.
really just information is just, and we're doing it so that we can have each example has a unique name.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but other than that, we're not doing anything special.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so now let's look at something more sophisticated. Can we do something that uses data binding? Because that's an amazing feature.
Yeah, data binding is great. It really allows us to save a lot of code that we would typically have to write in order to watch properties for changes and make the screen visually change when some property changes. So yeah, data binding.
Because it seems like most any user interface system is going to have events flying around all over the place, and if you have to type a ton of code each time you want to generate and respond to an event, you're rapidly going to become bogged down. So what data binding does is it says you're going to be doing this all the time, so what we'll do is simplify this.
Yeah.
And what we did in our second example, which is Hello World 2, is that we just have a string and a label which is bound
to that. Yeah, so let's write that. So what we're doing in this example is we have the text just explicitly set on that label property. But let's say we want to externalize that string out somewhere. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to actually do is create that string and then set this string equal to like hello world.
And I notice it's filling stuff in for you everywhere.
Yep, still code completing.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, this should be called Hello World 2 with no space.
Okay.
No space or comma.
Okay.
There we go, to conform to the book. Yes.
So this is Hello World 2, like in the book. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so then we're going to give this string an ID, and what did we call that in the book?
We called it message.
Message. Okay. So, and what was
And then we had this label, which is just text equals curly braces message.
Okay, so now we're going to do the data binding. So to do the data binding, we're going to put the braces in, and the braces are a binding expression in ActionScript. So what we're actually going to write is an ActionScript expression that's going to get evaluated, and then every time that property that we're binding to changes, it's going to tell this label to update its text property to reflect that change. Mm-hmm. So now we just put message in here. So we're binding this message string here so that when message changes, the label will display the text for that message property. Okay. So let's save that, compile, and then go run it. So now you'll see we're getting the same thing, and that's good. Because now we actually are pulling this string. We're not explicitly setting it on the label. We're pulling it in from an external string property.
Okay, but how do we know it's bound? I don't see any change. How do we change it?
Right, so we need to change, to show that binding is actually working, we need to have something in the UI that allows us to change the string property.
So I guess we could change the string to like a text input, maybe?
Yeah, sure, let's do that. So let's make this a text input. So text input, what it is just a control that allows the user to make a change to some text on the screen.
Okay, but you're going to need to change something.
So then we're going to give the text input a text property.
Right.
And set the text property to this hello world. Right?
Okay.
So now that's going to be just the default property. But now we want this label also to bind to not the message, because message is text input.
Okay.
So this is this message ID refers to
the
this,
object
the
that
object.
is the text input.
Yeah.
And
But what we want to get to is the property that is actually holding the value.
So if you type a dot, will we
So
get,
we want message dot text.
Okay, so that's the text that is held within the text input object.
Let's make that look like it does in the book. Okay. So now we have a text input that defaults to hello world, and then a label that displays whatever our text input's text property is.
And this is actually hello world 3 now.
And this is hello world 3. Mm-hmm. So let's save that, and now go reload this in our browser. And now we're seeing, oh, we did one thing wrong. Let's go fix that. So what we're actually seeing is the label is actually overlapping the text input, so it looks kind of weird. So the reason why it's doing that is that we're still using the layout absolute, and I believe that in the book we don't have layout absolute.
Okay.
So when we take out layout absolute, it moves to the vertical layout, and so now what's going to happen is that the text input should be at the top, and then below that will be the label, and that's what we're looking for. So let's save that and reload. So now there we go, and you also notice that things then became horizontally centered, and that's because in the vertical layout it defaults to horizontal centering.
Okay, so now when you change what's in there, we should, I see, and it changes instantly, and there's no, so what's happening here is when you type something, that's generating an event, and somebody's capturing the event and noticing that it's changed and making the change.
And then automatically notifying this label to update its essentially view of that property.
So in Java, you would have to attach event listeners, and of course that's not true with
JavaFX.
JavaFX, they kind of took a lesson from here and said, oh, that's too much trouble. Let's make it simpler.
Exactly.
Okay. So the last thing that we have in this chapter and in each chapter is the further learning section. So what we're trying to do in the book is just give you enough to get you to understand the basic concept. And in the further learning sections, we have these topics and little arrows that take you to the website. And there are particular subcategories on the website that have additional information that we can enumerate for you. And we do that in each chapter so that you can go find out additional information. But you don't have to know that to get started or to move on to the next chapter.
Exactly.